Welcome everyone to this edition of Business Standard Lunch with Business Standard, but it's tea time here. So we will call it Coffee with Business Standard or Chai with Business Standard. I have my chai with me. I
Well,
am,
I've just had mine.
and joining us today is what can I wouldn't even try to introduce this person. I would just say the name and you would know who I am talking about. The legend that I am with. This is Ruskin Bond. So, Mr. Bond, thank you so much for taking out your precious time for us.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you and to talk to you and your readers and viewers.
Thank you, thank you. Yes, we are really looking forward to this, and I am pretty sure our readers and our viewers would be looking forward to this. Um, but let's begin with the most important question. Mr. Bond, what are you having for chai?
What am I having for?
Chai.
For chai. Oh, it was my granddaughter Bina's birthday. So with my evening cup of tea, I had a big slice of cake.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah,
Um,
sorry, go ahead.
well, I'm not a great one for cake. I prefer things like you know, aloo tikkis and golgappas and chaat. So I don't really have a sweet tooth, but it's being her birthday. I went for the cake too.
So what's your go-to dish, go-to snack in Lander?
Oh, in Lando, actually up here, well, there's a well-known bakery and there are a lot of little tea shops, but they're not chaat shops. Huh? For that, you'd have to go into the town. There are a couple there. And when I used to live in Dehradun, there were some there too. So you have to be in the bazaar, in the marketplace, I think, where lots of people go. Lando is a little too, maybe, I don't know, exclusive is the word. But so you get more or less Western confectionery. And so you have to sort of make an effort actually to go and get something different.
I also ask because there's a collection of your short stories called Road to the Bazaar, which I think is my favorite collection of short stories.
Thank
And
you. You must have been very young when you read it first, no? It's one
I
of
was.
no,
I was, and it has stayed with me for so long, and it was one of my school time favorites.
thank you.
And what I really loved about it was that you talk about the bazaar, of course, and you talk about the samosas and the chaats,
Yes.
and you talk about the food and the craze about the food around it. So does that sort of come from your? I'm sure it comes from your own
Yeah,
experience.
well, people do. I suppose critics and others say maybe I write too much about food or put a lot of food into my stories and articles. But but when I'm writing for children, I think it's a good thing to bring food into the stories because it's very important to them. And over the years, I mean, sometimes people ask me, what do the children of today have in common with the children of my childhood, say the 1950s and 60s? And I would say the things they like to eat, basically. So food, I think, is certainly important, of great importance to kids. So they like to read about it. But I don't go into recipes and because I can't cook. uh, and and I in fact only pulled myself up the other day when I was writing in my journal and I started making a list of all the things I liked eating, and I said, "This is nonsense," and I cut it out. Instead, I made a list of the books I should be reading. But,
So you mentioned the time passing, and we are coming on to 15th of August very soon, right? So you are about 14 years older than India. And she,
Yeah, 1947, yeah. I was, let's see, I was born in 34, 13, yeah, I was 13, at 13,
right.
14. Mm.
So,
Yes, I
and
was at school. I was in boarding school in Simla.
right,
Um, yes, um, and I remember it quite vividly, 15th of August, 1947, because we all had to, our school was about a 45-minute walk from the town, um, from the from the place where all these meetings were held, the upper mall. And so the whole school had to march up into town for a special event. I think the governor was going to give a speech. And that time, Simla was still the summer capital of India, After that, it, of course, became Himachal Pradesh's capital. But so it was a big event for us. It was raining, of course. Usually it does rain around 15th August. So we all had our gumboots and Macintoshes, and we went plowing up, and um, there was a flag raising. The new Indian flag went up, and the old Union Jack came down, and there were speeches, of course, and we were all very hungry. And then, fortunately, someone came around with packets of samosas and jalebis, I think. So we weren't didn't go too hungry for long. And of course, in our school, we had a flag raising too, and the school captain did the honors. I was still a junior then, being 13. And so that was it. And it sort of took place in a natural way. It wasn't perhaps because we were at school, and it was something that we were expecting, and that it happened without any great fuss or drama. But of course, not long after that, due to the partition, and then a lot of disturbances, riots broke out all over the north, and people from uh, West Punjab fled into India, and vice versa. And in Bengal, something similar happened, and it was a very bad 3 or 4 months when I came home from Simla to Dehradun, and I heard about all these things. Being a boy, obviously I was protected from seeing what happened, and then things quietened down, and then suddenly I was at the pictures. Yeah, I'd gone to the cinema in Dehradun, watching a film called Blossoms in the Dust. I still haven't seen all of it, because after 10 minutes, the manager of the cinema hall stopped the film and came out on the stage and said, "We're sorry to inform you that Mahatma Gandhi has just been shot, and we have to stop the show." And then there was one week's morning, and I remember plodding home. It was late evening, and so a lot of things were happening one after the other. So it was, although a great time, it was also an unsettled time. And then things sort of gradually, came back to normal, and you could say the Nehru era began. For how many years was he prime minister? 15 or around. And yes, and then gradually the country started changing. People who were very poor were then for some time not so poor. I mean, nobody got rich overnight. But anyway, there was a lot of optimism in the air. And the fact that India had very good standing internationally too. That made a difference. Yeah. Um, 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 and of course, there were 5-year plans, and dams came up.
Right.
I saw Chandigarh coming up into existence. Yeah.
Wow.
Because when I was at school, similar 1950 was my last year, there was no Chandigarh. It was a wilderness, just a flat plain, barely a tree. And now look at it today with it's full of parks, gardens, lakes, trees. And in those early years, I was went there once or twice. The buildings were just coming up, and a few saplings were being planted here and there. So you saw this gradually this sort of city coming into existence, which was very interesting. So it's nice to see history happen, um, especially when it's in a visual form, like not not people fighting with each other, but a building, but a city coming up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is so enthralling in the sense that it's India's turning 75 now, and you have, as you were mentioning, you have lived through some of the most important, some of the most crucial, and now
Yes.
adding to the list is a pandemic. Um,
Yes, right. Who would have envisioned a pandemic, of this nature?
right.
We used to think of India's of the dangers from, say, malaria or jaundice and dysentery and those sort of
Right.
illnesses, but nobody envisioned a,
Right.
a worldwide pandemic, uh, which affected somebody else, someone else. So, so there it is. Yes, we
Right.
can't really predict what's going to happen.
But but and this is what I think, reading your short stories, reading your novels as well. Your stories have often painted a very different, almost a parallel history of India, mostly away from the big events, but yet not quite untouched. Would you say this sort of balance was a conscious choice, or was it the natural approach, or the environment of your writing, the content that you were talking about?
Mm. I guess maybe at heart I'm really a poet. So when I'm writing about India, or I'm looking at it from trying to capture the atmosphere in a way, uh, or the atmosphere of a town or a hill station or a village, and the children or adults who live in it and what they're doing, or myself as a boy too. A lot of my writing goes back to my own childhood because I'm a, a, a subjective writer, you might say. Huh? I'm not very good at plots and any just write out of everyday life in a way. So yeah, maybe that's what I try to capture, everyday life, in a sense, and the aspirations of kids, and their ups and downs, their adventures, their friendships. Friendship has always been important to me. Um, and in fact, that first novel of mine, The Room on the Roof, which I wrote as far back as, well, I wrote it in the 1950, 53. It took me two years to get a publisher. So it was out in 56, 1956, and it's still around. It's still in print. So that was all about friendship, really, relationships, and it's, I guess, that's still the theme in most of my work. It runs through.
Right. Um, but you know what, and this is almost like a cliched question, and almost like a trap as well, like when we talk about independence, when we talk about 75 years and 50 years and all of that, any discussion around that inevitably invokes narratives of struggle, the
Hmm?
partition, colonial rule,
Yes.
protest movements, all of that, right? In all these years, do you think the struggle has continued, albeit in a new avatar, or are we moving from one struggle to another, constantly evolving? And what would you say your approach has been in addressing these struggles in your stories?
Yes, it's been a gradual evolve. The sort of the India of today sort of evolved gradually over a period of time, although there have been dramatic events. But I think life in general and the way we live, um, of course, you get um, you get the forget about uh, politics and religion. All there's a sort of you have the life. It's from what I always see is a sort of middle class, upper class, working class. You know how they've evolved over the years, huh? And whereas because say like back in the 50s, 60s, the middle class was a very small segment uh, in a way of the population. Now it's a much bigger segment and a more influential one, and certainly a more prosperous one. Uh, the working class has also, to some extent, changed, but it hasn't perhaps uh, gone upwards in terms of economic mobility at with the same speed as the middle class. Huh? So you still have like people working as migrant workers or in rural areas and managing on a small income. And of course, that what is also shrunk or shriveled in a way is the upper class, the more what in those times we would have the sort of landowning and princely class and so that has gone down in influence. So I think more and more of a middle class influence, although they are not in terms of numbers the great majority, but I think and so many of them too have aspirations, which we have this phenomenon of so many young Indians going abroad and making a mark there. Whereas back in the say in the 1950s, when I was in London for 3 or 4 years, there was a number of Indians. There was mostly students, student class. They had not gone for work or employment. That happened in the 60s when there was a big influx from the Punjab, basically. So and now it's more those who are collegiates or technological people who go abroad and very often don't come back, but but nevertheless do well for themselves and hopefully for their kith and kin back in India.
It's interesting that you mentioned this because I'll share a small anecdote with you, like a personal experience. So I'm a big fan of Room on the Roof with all the short stories and all of that. Um, One of the things that happened recently was I was moving back to Delhi after almost 6, 7 years. And I got myself a small rented place. And the first thing, without even seeing the rented place, the first thing that came to my mind was that small window.
Window.
Right?
Yes.
Small window. And I imagined that if I could get something like that, like with that small window over, overviewing a street, a small street or something like that.
Yes.
I, 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 I have never been to Missouri except probably for one vacation or two or something like that. And you cannot, it's almost maddening. It's almost crazy to kind of imagine that in a Delhi setting. But that's the first sort of image that came to my mind, right? So, and and that got me thinking, and you were talking about people going away to abroad, other cities. When you talk about these young people in your stories, people who are constructing their entire worlds through these windows, living through these small spaces and making them into a world,
Yes.
right? So the India of your tales, therefore, lives in the hills, woven with bougainvillea vines, looking out through old windows. But that India, like others, have seen sea changes.
Hmm.
How different would have been the experience, or probably not, if you had started writing now?
If I had started writing now, oh, if I had been if I'd been 17 now, 17, 18, and wanted to start it, right? And there are so many who are 17 and 18 who are writing now or wanting to write. It's amazing the number of young people who are writing.
Right,
Um, when when I finished school in 1950, there was no one in my class or school who were in the least interested in
right,
taking up a writing or even a journalistic career. Um, I came home and when I finished school, and my mother wanted me to join the army, and she thought it. I was being very silly when I said I'm going to be a writer, but so now, but there are so many, and if I was one of them, but you see, a writer is often, I think, the more subjective kind of writer is born and not made. I mean, you can learn to be a good writer or a better writer, but I think the the natural instinct to write is sort of embedded in your nature in a way.
right.
Um, so if I was starting out now, I would still, I think, be wanting to write about the natural world,
Mm,
uh, and maybe I would still be writing or would want to write for children or young people.
mm,
Um, no, if I'm 17, 18, well, you see, when I wrote The Room on the Roof, I was 17 or 18. It
mm,
was a book by an adolescent
mm,
about about adolescence. So would I be doing the same thing today, writing about adolescence?
mm.
Maybe I would. I'm a great diarist and journal. I keep a journal. So
Right.
a lot of what stories and other things come out of that. So
Mm,
if today if I was 17 or 18 and keeping a journal, it
mm,
would also reflect the world around me,
mm.
and the people I live with and relationships and everything. So it would have, it would be about the present. Um, since I would be 17, 18, and not much past. that was a that was the problem I had when I wrote The Room on the Roof. It
Right.
it was about myself as a boy,
Mm,
and when it was finished and published, I had nothing else to write about because I was still only 19 or 20. Um, so then I went into short stories and all sorts of things. Now I write a bit of poetry too.
mm.
Um, but I keep writing every day something,
But
something.
but would it have been more challenging being an adolescent now? Just like you mentioned the nature aspect.
Mm.
And again, grown up, I have grown up in Delhi. I've spent all my life in Delhi.
Well, I
And
spent large segments of my life in Delhi.
okay,
Before, that's the with my father in 1943, 44.
right.
Those when I was a small boy. Then again in the late 50s and 60s. Again, a very different Delhi. How Delhi has changed
Yeah,
over the years and
yeah,
and today,
right.
because in the 1940s it was just the capital area, New Delhi, where we were, and there was Old Delhi, Shah Jahanabad and Chandni Chowk and all that. And we used to go to the Old Delhi station,
Mhm.
get into a Tonga near Connaught Place, and go clip-clopping all the way to Old Delhi. There
Wow.
weren't many taxis around or cars.
Yeah.
That was 1943, 44. And then in the 60s, of course, Delhi was enormous. It was bulging now because with all the displaced people who'd come from West
Mm,
Punjab
right,
and settled in Delhi.
right.
And they were very vibrant communities, so they were all busy doing something or the other.
Mm,
So Delhi changed from a rather sleepy sort of capital into a very busy one.
busy one.
Yeah, and that's now continued
And
like
now you have
August.
Yeah, now you have metro zooming around, cabs and all of that. It's so how completely different would have been that experience of being a writer trying to capture these the dynamicity of it all.
When in the 60s, it was already quite dynamic. I used to walk, though. I would
Mhm.
walk from Connaught Place to Rajouri Garden. It took me about 3 hours in the evening, eating boiled eggs all the way. They used to sell boiled eggs along the road.
Right.
And
They
I'd
still
walk
do.
from Connaught Place to Majumiri Gate. Um, well, I could do it then. And even then, the streets were busy. So if I was wanting to cross a street, because I was very nervous where traffic is concerned, I would usually get between two large ladies, and when they crossed, I'd cross too. I was pretty safe. But now I wouldn't dare walk around Delhi like that on the street side. It wouldn't. I don't think I'd last long. It's not no longer for pedestrians or
Yeah.
cyclists. It's purely a four-wheel city, I think now. Mm.
Right. So thinking also about this, and you have mentioned in several of your interviews, also talking about your books, that you have often called yourself a visual writer. And as you speak, I can see that you like even in your writing, even in your speech, that you're thinking in images too. Am I right? Uh, but the nature of visuals is also changing rapidly. There's
Mm.
certainly a lot more of them, more easily available and faster coming. So,
Mm.
have you dealt with these new visuals vis-a-vis? How have you dealt with these new visuals vis-a-vis your writing? Do you watch any of the new web series, get memes and gifs forwarded to you, or forward them, or have you completely resisted them?
No, no, I watch the news in the evenings. I watch foreign channels. I watch Indian news channels. I watch sport. I very keep up to date on sport. I watch nature channels as well. Something of everything. I get 4 newspapers in the morning, and uh, and I read them um, quite avidly because I prefer newspapers to TV news, honestly, because you're getting in a newspaper a straightforward reportage of something that's happening, and often in some detail too. Whereas perhaps on a TV news channel, it's so much of personalities coming into it and clashing viewpoints and
Mm.
uh, when all you want is really the news.
Right, right, right,
um, so that's why I prefer newspapers. Also, maybe out of habit, because I grew up with newspapers.
right.
My earliest memories, I think people often ask me what was the first book I read, but
Mm.
looking back and thinking about it, 19 I must have been 3 or 4 years old. I can only remember the newspaper landing
Mm.
on the veranda with the
Mm.
thump, and this was in Jamnagar, 1936, 37.
Mhm.
And my father would glance through it, and I would grab it and not. Well, I would go to there used to be a children's page and things like that. So I grew up on newspapers. Maybe that's why I still read them. I
Right.
don't know if other people do.
But but
But
but what about the new media? What about things like GIFs or memes or things like um, even graphic novels? India is now producing. There are so many writers who are coming up with these graphic novels.
yeah,
Comic
well, that's true. I had one or two of my 2 or 3 of my stories turned into graphic novels or even comics, um, and that's fine. I read a lot still. I read well printed books, but they are but I get them via internet because one reason being that I'm often looking for authors that are maybe out of print or rare travel books or books that you won't normally find in bookshops. So you can, and though I'm technologically totally illiterate, all the children in the house they're all fully equipped. I mean, this laptop is theirs. So so they'll find a book for me. So I just tell them the name of an author, and they'll find authors who I thought I'd never see again. But everything seems to get reprinted, and there must be a small readership. So I get all kinds of books. I like crime fiction. I like travel. I like a bit of history if it's not too dull, and so on. So I do read a lot. We got this YouTube, and I was surprised to find I was on it too.
Even this interview might end up on the YouTube.
Yeah, I know. One of the kids said, "Oh, you were on the YouTube." That's the Dada. I said, like, that's time.
But I'm sorry if I'm cutting you in there for a minute there, but you mentioned somewhere, I think one of your interviews, you said that you used to watch a lot of films, but you have sort of stopped watching films. Uh,
I grew up on films, and
mhm,
I would think in a way they influenced me, because when write a story, or before I sit down to write it, I would visualize it. You were
yeah,
talking about visualizing
yeah,
something, so I would visualize it from beginning to end.
mm,
The what the incidents, the action, the characters, and even the dialogue. So
yeah,
that makes it so much easier when I sit down to write it, because then it's a question of putting it to words and sentences and making it interesting.
yeah,
Also, I don't break down in the middle and have writer's block, because I've already written it in my head.
mm,
So it's very useful to visualize. So the visual element is very strong in everything I write,
mm,
because in a way I'm seeing it before I put it down.
yeah,
I also keep a dream book. If I have an interesting dream,
yeah,
I'll if I remember it in the morning, I'll put it down in
mhm,
a notebook.
mhm,
Not that I'm trying to predict the future through dreams or anything like that, but sometimes a dream can develop into a story. You can use that, the incidents, the happenings, the people in a dream in some way or the other.
mhm,
And it's interesting in itself.
mhm.
Um, uh, I'm not trying to be Dr. Freud and interpret them, but
Right.
but, uh, but it helps. So,
That's
so
so, yeah. Go ahead,
yeah,
sorry.
so everything somehow gets used, gets put to use in a way in one's writing, especially since I've for long periods lived on my own, or even though I'm with family now, their interests are different. So my writing is something that's totally between me and the letter and the writing pad,
Mhm.
in a way. Mm. I
That's so
don't have, I don't show it to anybody.
almost like your secret of stories.
Secret till it's published.
So this is so interesting. And again, thinking about the long career and the changes in terms of writing, the different kinds of writings that have come up and the different kind of writers that have
Yes.
also come up in India. What other author have you interacted with during your long career whose work you found most endearing? Any memorable interactions or anecdote with a certain R.K. Narayan? Hello. So can you hear me? So your visual is frozen. I think there's some network issue. Oh, All right, we're in. So let me repeat that question a little bit. The one I think we got cut off in the middle of.
I think again, Baba.
Hello, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, but with interruptions, it keeps going off.
Yeah. I think the signal's a little weak. Is it getting better now? I can see you very clearly though. I can hear you.
Ask Gautam.
Quickly. Okay, so that's so fascinating, and we were talking about this long career and the evolution of writing and writers and different kind of writers
Yes,
coming
yes.
in. So what I've been I had this thought for some time. What other author have you interacted with during your long career whose work you found most endearing? Any memorable interactions or anecdotes with a certain R.K. Narayan?
No, I never met R.K. Narayan, though I'd certainly, he's one of the authors I read just as I was finishing school. When I was getting my first novel published, Narayan was already an established author. And in those days, you see, you had to look abroad to get published. If you wrote a book, you had to try and get it published in Britain. We didn't have any publishers here who brought out, say, literary works. There were school books and college books, but not creative writing. And so writers like R.K. Narayan, Mulk Rajanand, and Rajaram, others all had to really look for publishers abroad. And Narayan was very successful at that. So was Mulk Rajanand, who perhaps is not read so much today, because he was a writer of his times. He was very much a writer of he wrote about the independence movement and partition, and all that came into his work. And I did also, when I was just out of school, I read Untouchable and Coolie and those other works of his. And strangely enough, in the late 1990s, when he was in his 90s, and I was then, I think, around 60. He was in Missouri. He'd come to give a lecture at the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in his 90s, something I don't think I'd ever be able to do. And he turned up at my doorstep here, and we hadn't met before, and he didn't know that I was here, but somebody brought him over. And so we did have a long chat and talked about books, and his in particular, because I knew his books quite well. And I think he had read one of mine, but that was it. So when we kept in touch after that, he would send me the odd postcard signed Uncle Mulk. And so of course, so he was a writer of the 50s and 60s and of pre-independence and the early years of independence. There are other writers who were well thought of in the 50s and 60s, were like Kamala Markandeya and Bhabani Bhattacharya and a few others, but not there were, as compared to today, just a few writers. And as you're quite right when you said today we have so many writers being published, not just in English, but in Hindi, in our regional languages, and being translated. What we maybe are short of is good translators, because that would bring so much more of Indian literature onto the world stage in a way. If we had it, and you have to, in a way, to get international recognition, translate those works into English, because whether we like it or not, English is a is a global language, and one can't do without it. Really, it makes it's very helpful. All these young people who go out nowadays to make a career for themselves in science or technology or politics or whatever, they're all well versed in the English language. So there it is. And of course, I think there must be today at least, I would say, almost 100 Indian writers here in India who make a living out of writing fiction or non-fiction, something that wasn't possible back in the 50s or 60s when I was writing. There were just 2 or 3 people who made a living out of books then. You couldn't count Khushwant Singhs who had a lot of money anyway, or 1 or 2 others. But those who actually made a living from out of book royalties, you could have counted on one hand, fingers of one hand. So today there are many who do, who write maybe fiction or write on politics or other subjects, and whose books get published and sell quite well. So that means we have more readers in a way. And why do we have more readers? Because there are more people who are educated and capable of reading in English and Hindi and in the other languages. So the more the merrier. May literature to thrive, especially Indian literature, whatever the language it be in. And if I can still contribute to it in a small way, I will.
So are there some new favorites from the upcoming, or are there any writer you happen to?
I've just started this. It's Vinod Kumar Shukla. He's an Hindi writer, and it's a good translation. So I just started it.
Right.
And somebody else said, books get sent to me. A lot of books are by self-published writers, so they can vary in quality, because there are publishers who will bring out anything you give them if you pay for it. So you can't always. But it's interesting to see how keen, just how many people want to get into print and have a byline or get published, even school kids. And sometimes fond parents will even shug out 2 or 3 lakhs to have a 12-year-old novel published. Just so they can say that, she's written a book, because it may just end there, the whole thing. So it's sort of, writing is in fashion, you could say.
It really nicely ties into my next question. That
Sorry.
publication. Sorry, could you hear that?
No, there's some slight interruption. Now you can, yes.
Okay, let me repeat that. So I just said that ending note that kind of really nicely ties into my next question, which is, I've been thinking about that over the years, the publication style, approach to publishing books and literature, short stories, novels, have changed so much. And you mentioned so many of those facets there.
Yes.
Is there a particular facet which you thought, oh, this should have been earlier during my time? Or is there a facet which you looked at and you said, thank God I didn't have to deal with that during my time?
I'm trying to think. No, I would say the relationship between the author and the publisher has perhaps changed over the years. You see, because the reason being that now, especially if you want to get published abroad, you have to have an agent. So for a writer has to have an agent first and then a publisher. Hmm? So, but if you go back in time to the 50s or 60s, and agents were there, but they weren't vital. They weren't absolutely necessary. So you could, I mean, I never had an agent all my life. So there was a closer relationship between author and publisher. So when I was a young writer of 18 or 19 in London, I developed a very good relationship with my publisher's chief editor, and so you learned something in that way, give and take. So it was good for a writer to have a close relationship with his publisher and not work through a third party. The third party is only interested in the 10 or 15% commission that he or she is going to get. So they will look at a manuscript from the point of view of its saleability entirely, first and foremost. If it's also good writing, that might help, but it's got to be saleable. Whereas a good publisher in the past, and I'm thinking thinking of publishers in Britain, would often take on a book or a novel by an unknown writer if they thought there was promise there, that writer had a future, or even if they thought this won't make money, but we'd like to have it on our list. So that's rare now. That's rare. So even the publishers, agents, now they all look at a book as, will it sell? Will it sell? That's the difference. Now everything is seen from the prism of the marketplace, and marketing has come into the whole business of writing. You wrote a book in the 50s or 60s, it got published, it got a few reviews. You went and looked to see if it was in a bookshop on display or not. And if it was successful, you wrote another book. So, but you didn't have to go out on your own, in a way, like a salesman, to promote your own book, which is what authors nowadays have to do at literary fests, or launches, or here and there, or talking to Business Standard, as I'm doing. So all in all part of the promotion, marketing. This wasn't a part of it. We were innocents, then you could say. And now we're getting smart. Even I'm getting smart.
All right, this has been so fabulous, and I want to end with one last question. This is also coming from the point of view of a fan, somebody who has grown up reading your books and wants more, right? To read of your fabulous writing. Is there a secret collection of a different kind of writing you haven't felt like sharing yet, but would like to now or sometime in future share with the world? So these can be short stories of a different flavor. And we talked about food. So are there discovered recipes or even jokes
No,
or
I've never
limericks?
written a recipe because I can't cook. I mean, I could write a book called 50 Different Ways of Boiling an Egg. That should be a bestseller. But or 101 Failed Omelets. But no, I have to confess that maybe the odd diary entry over the years might have something I wouldn't have put into print. But actually, I think almost everything I've written has been used or gone into a story or a novel or a memoir, even, as I said, dreams and journal entries, and still do. And if there's something I didn't want to see in print, well, I wouldn't put it down in any case. So there's nothing that to be discovered later. I've used up everything that I've written and still do, and everything that I've had published over these 70 years of writing It's still in print. I don't have, I don't know, it's just luck or what, that nothing has gone out of print. Everything is there, even silly little not stories and nonsense verses. Somehow, nothing has gone out of print. So sometimes a publisher comes to me and asks me, Mr. Bond, isn't there something of yours you can give us that you haven't given to any other publisher? Just a story or or something you've written. And I have to honestly say, no, there isn't. When I write something new, I'll give it to you.
I mean, what really intrigues me is that all those animal stories, there must be some interaction with animals that, like your interaction with animals.
Yeah, we have a cat. It just bit one of us the other day, but the but I'll have to confess that you see those animal stories were all linked to my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. A lot of them. He used to keep strange pets and unusual ones, and although I was too small to know him very well, but my mother used to tell me these stories about his pets and animals. So they were funny, some of them. And when I wrote them, they were quite successful. So I wrote more. And then I had to make up a few because I'd run out of grandfather's pets, the real ones. So then I started writing. Well, I'm a fiction writer, so I'm allowed to tell lies, up to at least on paper. So I had to make up animals pets that didn't exist. So sometimes people call me a tale teller or what's the word, Munchausen. But I do like animals because they're part of the natural world, and but I'm not a great one for keeping house pets. I'd prefer animals to be in their natural or wild state.
All right, this has been great. Any on a last note, on an ending note, any poetry or couplets that you would or lines, one-liner that stamps the signature of Ruskin Bond into the hearts and memories of our readers?
Okay. Well, when I first came to live in Missouri and I took a cottage down in the forest, not this one, and walking home late at night, I saw a fox actually dancing in the moonlight. And I wrote a little poem about that fox, which went, as I walked home last night, I saw a lone fox dancing in the bright moonlight. I stood and watched, then took the low road, knowing the night was his by right. And sometimes when words ring true, I am like a fox dancing in the morning dew. So when I wrote my autobiography, I called it Lone Fox Dancing.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful.
But one of my young readers came to me and said, "Sir, why do you call yourself a fox? A fox?" He confused a fox with a jackal. He said, "A fox, it's a gider. You're not a gider." So I said, "No, a fox is nicer than a jackal." Yeah. And then there was a lady on one of our news channels who interviewed me at that time, and she kept referring to the book as Lone Wolf Dancing. And I said, "I'm not a wolf, never been one." Fox dancing.
And the fox is much more beautiful, much more. I especially
like lovely,
the
red color.
Yeah,
and not very common either. And no.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You made me talk.
This has been really, really delightful. I hope our readers and viewers would. I don't hope. I'm sure that our readers and viewers will love hearing from you. Thank you so much. I'll signing out now.
Thank you. Well, we'll meet again.